Welcome to this deep dive into the U.S. environmental landscape. As you know, there's a lot going on, and it can be a little tough to get a handle on everything. But today we're going to try to unpack some of it and look at both the challenges and the potential solutions out there.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at a whole bunch of stuff from offshore wind energy to those wildfires, and even take a look at how climate change is impacting specific places like the Mississippi River.
So let's start with offshore wind. The Biden administration has set this goal of 30 gigawatts of wind energy being generated off the East Coast by 2030, enough to power 10 million homes. I mean, that's huge. What kind of impact could this have on the energy market as a whole?
Oh, it's certainly a big move and could really signal a shift away from fossil fuels. If it's successful, I think we could see a ripple effect across the whole energy sector, which would probably lower costs and make us less dependent on foreign oil. But there are some hurdles. Building the infrastructure for a project this big won't be easy, especially in waters like off the East Coast.
And then there's the question of how it affects the industries that are already there. What happens to the fishing communities and the coastal ecosystem in these areas?
That's a really important thing to think about. We have to make sure that this transition to renewable energy doesn't hurt people's jobs or the environment. There's a ton of research being done right now to try to understand the potential impact on marine life and to come up with ways to reduce any negative effects. It's a tough balancing act.
It really makes you think about how we define sustainable development when there are so many different interests involved.
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Every single project needs to be looked at very carefully, and we need to consider the ecological, the economic, and the social factors that are at play.
Okay, so we've got this big push for clean energy, but at the same time, we're seeing climate change happening right now, especially with those really intense wildfire seasons in the West California, Oregon, Washington. They're being hit really hard.
Yeah, these wildfires are like a really clear sign that climate change isn't some future threat anymore. It's here now. Those long droughts that we're seeing, which are caused by higher temperatures, they create conditions that are just ready to burn. And the impact goes way beyond just the damage we see right away. We're talking about long-term problems with air quality, water resources, and even entire ecosystems.
It really shows how connected everything is. It's not just about trees burning, it's about how that affects the whole environment and even the economy.
Exactly. And these wildfires, they kind of give us a glimpse of what we might see all over the country as climate change gets worse. More powerful hurricanes on the Gulf Coast, more flooding in the Midwest. We're already seeing more extreme weather events happening more often.
And one of the most worrying things I've seen is what's happening with the Mississippi River. The water levels are super low, which is mostly because of the drought, and it's messing up trade and agriculture.
The Mississippi River is incredibly important for the economy of this country. When the water level drops, it causes a ton of problems. Shipping costs go up, farmers have trouble getting their crops to where they need to go, and the whole agricultural industry suffers. It really highlights how closely connected the environment and the economy are.
So we're seeing these challenges that are all connected to each other playing out on a huge scale. But are there solutions that are just as big and interconnected? I was reading about something called regenerative agriculture.
Oh, regenerative agriculture, that's a really interesting approach. It's all about getting the soil healthy again. It involves things like cover cropping, no-till farming, and crop rotation. And what's really cool is that these methods not only make the soil more fertile and help it hold water better, but they actually help take carbon dioxide out of the air and store it in the soil.
So it's like fighting climate change by starting with the ground.
Yeah, exactly. And the best part is these practices are good for farmers too. Healthier soil means they can grow more crops. They don't have to spend as much on things like fertilizer, and it helps them deal with droughts and other climate problems.
But are farmers actually doing this? Is it just an idea or is it really happening out there?
It's definitely gaining traction. We're seeing it happen for real, especially in places like Iowa and Nebraska, where there's a lot of farming. Farmers are seeing that it works, and I think a lot more farmers will start doing it too.
That's great to hear. If we can change the way we farm, that would be a huge step in the right direction. Another solution that seems to be getting more popular is electric vehicles. I see more and more of them on the roads these days.
Oh yeah, the electric vehicle market is growing, and that's a good thing. Things like tax breaks from the government, battery prices going down, and more places to charge them are all helping people switch to electric cars.
But that brings up an important question. Are we moving fast enough? If we want to reach our climate goals, we need to get people to stop using gas-powered cars pretty quickly.
That's the big question, and the answer is complicated.
Thinking about switching to EVs, it really makes you think about the role of government and policy. Individual choices are great, but without some bigger changes, they can only do so much.
Oh yeah, you're right. Systemic change is super important. That's why that Inflation Reduction Act that was passed back in 2022 was such a big deal. It was supposed to be this huge thing for climate change. But is it actually working? Is it living up to all the hype?
That's what I'm wondering about. There's always so much talk about these big policies. What's the real impact been so far?
Well, the Inflation Reduction Act put billions of dollars towards clean energy projects, tax breaks for electric vehicles, and environmental justice programs. And we are seeing more investment in clean energy, which is good.
That does sound promising, but I'm also thinking about the people who don't like it. Some say it doesn't go far enough or that it's not being done right. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, there are some real concerns about how fast things are moving and whether it's being done the right way. Some people say there isn't enough money to really deal with climate change, and others say that all the red tape is slowing things down.
So it's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction.
I think that's a fair way to put it. It's a starting point, and it shows that the U.S. is serious about moving towards clean energy.
It's interesting to see how all this plays out in politics. There are just so many different opinions and people trying to get what they want.
That's why it's so important to have people pushing for change from the ground up. A lot of the time, policies change because people demand it. We're seeing so much activism all across the country with people saying we need to do something about climate change and environmental justice.
I'm glad you mentioned that you've said environmental justice a few times. What does that mean exactly for someone who might not know?
So environmental justice means that everyone, no matter their race, their income, or where they live, deserves to live in a healthy environment and have the same access to things like clean air, clean water, safe housing, and parks and green spaces.
So it's about making things fair because a lot of times it's the communities that are already struggling that are hit hardest by environmental problems.
Exactly. We see communities fighting against pipelines that could hurt their land and water. They're pushing for everyone to have access to clean energy, and they're demanding that polluters take responsibility for the damage they cause.
Those stories are really inspiring, but sometimes it's hard not to feel overwhelmed by how big this climate crisis is. What can regular people do that will actually make a difference?
Every little thing helps. When a lot of people make small changes, it adds up. A good place to start is by using less energy at home. Switch to LED light bulbs, unplug things when you're not using them, and make sure your house is well insulated.
I try to do those things, but what about getting around? Not everyone can afford an electric car.
That's true, but there are still things you can do. You can carpool, take public transportation, ride your bike, or walk whenever you can. And when you do have to drive, make sure your car is in good shape so it uses less gas.
It's about being aware of the choices we make and trying to make good ones.
Exactly. And just using less stuff in general is important. Think about how much food you throw away. Try to buy less stuff and support companies that are trying to be sustainable and whose values you agree with.
So it's about making more conscious choices in our everyday lives.
Yes. And don't forget that you have a voice too. Talk to your community about climate-friendly policies, reach out to your elected officials, and support organizations that are working on climate change.
I like that. It's about finding ways to contribute even if they seem small.
Exactly. Every action, every voice helps create change.
We've talked about a lot today, from offshore wind energy to wildfires and even what individuals can do to help. Where do we go from here? What's one big idea you'd like our listener to think about? What will they remember after this?
It's been a really interesting conversation. The environmental problems we're facing are real, but I'm hopeful we have the knowledge, we have the technology, and more people are realizing that we need to do something to create a more sustainable future.
Wow, it's been really something exploring all these different aspects of what's happening with the environment in the U.S., hasn't it? We started with the potential of offshore wind energy, and then we saw how bad those wildfires are.
Yeah, and we saw how climate change is affecting the whole country, from the Mississippi River all the way to those forests out west. It really shows you how everything's connected.
But even with all these problems, it's amazing to see how people are coming up with new ideas and how resilient you can be. Things like regenerative agriculture, that electric vehicle thing, and policies like the Inflation Reduction Act show that things are changing for the better.
And you can't forget about all the people who are working to make things better, those communities all over the country that are demanding environmental justice and making sure those in charge are doing their job. That gives me hope.
It really does make you realize that everyone has a part to play in creating a better future for the planet.
Exactly. Every choice you make, every action you take, it all adds up to something bigger.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to walk away thinking about? What will really stick with them?
I think the most important thing to remember is that things are always changing in the environmental world. What we've talked about today is just a small piece of a much bigger picture. New problems will come up, new solutions will be found, and the political world will keep changing too.
So it's all about staying informed, staying involved, and being ready to adapt as things change.
Exactly. Keep being curious, look at things from different angles, and never stop asking questions. How are you going to help create a more sustainable world? What part will you play in this story that's still being written?
That's a great way to end this. I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the U.S. environmental landscape. Remember, everything you do, everything you say makes a difference. Keep learning, keep exploring, and keep pushing for a better world for everyone. See you next time.